Welcome back and thanks for staying with Newsnight. The legacy of apartheid is underestimated. That's according to an article on racism authored by struggle activist Doctor Mamphela Ramphele. She says the repeated racist attacks on the dignity of citizens reflects just how deeply ingrained racism is in the mindsets of many citizens. Recently, a businessman caused a stir on social media after posting a video using the K word. For discussion on this, Dr. Ramphele joins us now from our Cape Town studios. Good evening, Doctor. Thank you very much for your time. Wouldn't it have been incredibly naive, or too fantastically unrealistic of anyone to have expected racism to just disappear? I mean, a mere 24 years into democracy.
Yes, it would have been naive, but the drafters of our Constitution were very wise in understanding that we needed a roadmap from the culture and the values of colonial conquest, apartheid, to the culture and values of a constitutional democracy with a human rights focus. That is all laid out in the preamble of our Constitution, where we are enjoined to heal the divisions of the past and establish the values of a democratic, socially just, and open society.
Why do you think those were entrusted with, dealing with what apartheid did to this country haven't done what they are supposed to do?
Well, the people who are entrusted to do what needed to be done are you and I as citizens. We the people, that's what we say in the preamble of the Constitution. But we did not go on to insist on having programs which would have enabled us to have conversations of healing, to have conversations of making sure that our children in our homes, our schools, our streets, our places of worship, everywhere, get to talk about what it means to be a citizen of a democracy where human rights are front and center. We grew up, you and I, in homes where Ubuntu was something that was part of the language of our homes. But that has not been the case over the last few years. And the problem, Vuyo, is not only racism. I've just been listening to the story about the Parktown school and the kind of abuses of young people, sexual abuses. And we know that our country is riddled with gender-based violence. All of those issues are a reflection of a society which has yet to embrace the values of a human rights culture.
Doctor, no one, I think will disagree with you that it is you and I's job to do what needs to be done. But fact of the matter, or the reason we vote governments into power, is so that they can take care of a lot of things on our behalf, with us, whatever you call it, or however one puts it. But there's a reason why you have a department that deals with international relations. You have a department that deals with finance. You have a department that deals with women's issues. It's so that each and every aspect of our lives is taken care of. And that is why I don't think we should allow or we should turn a blind eye to what politicians or those in power have or haven't done.
Absolutely. But we get the leaders and the politicians we deserve, because having voted them in for the last 24 years, we haven't held them accountable to address these issues. And even now, we are going for elections next year. Are we going to make values-based social relationships and the healing of the wounds of the past an election issue? And if not, how are we going to make sure that for example, in our schools, we've got life orientation. Part of orienting young people to life as citizens of a democracy ought to be the discussion on the values of human rights, the values of Ubuntu, and those must be reflected in the teaching and learning environments of our schools, the places of worship, and workplaces. Now, we obviously have to hold the politicians accountable, but we must also hold ourselves accountable because the private sector is also implicated in not having workplace environments that promote human rights values.
But those we hear from on a daily basis, aren't they supposed to show the way in many respects? Because that is their job. I mean, if you take major political parties, for example, whether it's on television, on the radio, in newspapers, and so on, what they do or the things the politicians say tends to dominate political discourse. And often because they sometimes get, rub people out like up the wrong way, and they bring out the worst in people. Aren't they the ones who should be taking the lead? Yes, you and me are supposed to do what we are supposed to do, but I still maintain that those who are in the public eye are those who should be leading us.
Absolutely, but we must hold them accountable if they fail to lead us. I haven't heard journalists in this country challenge our politicians about the preamble of the Constitution and what they are doing, what they are offering as programs of healing, as programs of establishing the values of human rights in our society. So I agree with you that the leaders should lead, but where leaders fail, we the people need to hold them accountable and demand as parents that our schools must use life orientation as a place where young people can be helped to embrace the values of a human rights culture. We should insist that as people who worship, and South Africans are very religious people, are we insisting that our leaders in the religious communities also play their role in making sure that they don't only preach the word in vacuum, but make sure that we embrace those values?
Well, let me put you on the spot then, because a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, and I'm not passing any judgment on this one, say that the reason Patricia de Lille went through what she went through is because of racism within the Democratic Alliance, for example. And some go further to say what we are seeing happening in the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro is racism from one person who doesn't think that black people are good enough, or who runs roughshod over the interests of black people. Now, I'm not saying that is true or not, but here's what I want to ask you. To what extent then do people like you, for example, who went to bed with the Democratic Alliance at some point, do you not feel that it is also through actions of people like you that people tend to make up their minds about whether or not racism exists, about whether to confirm some of the ideas or thoughts that they may have about where racism or its residue still resides? For example, you never told us why you really left the Democratic Alliance, which a lot of people say remains the bastion of racism within South African politics.
It is not true, Vuyo, that I didn't say why I left. I explained to the South African public that we had an agreement that I will have to consult with the people, the members of AHANG, in order to sign up on the agreement of being in coalition with the Democratic Alliance. And the ANC has been in a coalition with the Democratic Alliance. So I don't believe that being in coalition, the EFF is in coalition with the Democratic Alliance. That doesn't make one a person who tolerates racism. I agree that some of the people in the Democratic Alliance, including Helen Zille, who continues to talk about colonialism having had its benefits, which displays great ignorance on her part, because Africa is a cradle, not just of humanity, but the cradle of civilization. And to argue that without colonialization we wouldn't have had civilization in Africa is extreme ignorance and arrogance. And I speak out about those things. I've written a book, Vuyo, to explain what you are talking about. And so I don't think it is useful to apportion blame to one individual. I have been an activist, and I continue to be an activist, but my point right now is that if we as South Africans want to live in a society that is governed by human rights values, we've got to demand that. We mustn't get shocked when there is state capture. The whole culture of colonial conquest, of apartheid, was about state capture. But we needed to have interrupted that culture through the programs that would have supported the commitments we made as we the people in the preamble of our Constitution. But the point is, we have not used the Constitution as the Bible or the Torah or the Quran of this democracy. And all I'm saying to you and I and to my fellow citizens is, let us go back to holding our leaders accountable for failing to follow through with programs that would help young people, old people, people in the private and the public sector to embrace the values of our constitutional democracy. That's all there is to it. And we are not the only country that would be doing that. Scandinavian countries that we know today as having a social democratic ethos invested time and energy, and it wasn't the politicians who started it. It was started by the leaders of religious organizations, the pastors of the church. And so we can't wait for politicians to do this work of values-based, social, just society. It's work that the politicians should enable, but we the people must make sure we do our part and we hold those whom we put in public office accountable for their failure to institute the programs, for example, in our school curriculum and in the workplace, in the public service, that the people serving us must proceed from a values base that is in line with the values of our Constitution.
Dr. Ramphele, unfortunately, we're going to leave it there. We've run out of time. I wish we had more time. Thank you very much for your time this evening. She has, of course, penned a piece where she says the boldness of repeated racist attacks on the dignity of citizens reflects just how deeply ingrained racism is in the mindset of many citizens in this country.